Hey everybody, welcome back to Visual Narratives in my house. We're in my house. It was a beautiful day out today, and I decided to stay home, do some yard work. Probably will be hearing my neighbors doing yard work out there. It's just the time to do it, I guess. Um, so today, let's take a look at the syllabus, and it's a little bit, not necessarily a break from the syllabus, but it's a translation of the syllabus by me. So today we were going to discuss how comics, like a 2D comic, would be translated into an animation and or live action picture. And the class discussion was going to focus on how these things translated across these different varieties of media, what has worked, what has not, and why. I'm not going to do that here by myself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assign that to you as your work for the week, so that you can actually put that into the discussion format, and I'll explain that more in a little bit. I just think it'll work better that way because we can't have back and forth in the classroom, and therefore it's just not going to work with the materials that I had planned for this sort of thing. So instead I came up with a whole other way of looking at that, still covering the same ideas and still actually getting you in on the discussion, but just more appropriate to this online format, I suppose. Before I do that, I want to get into last week's discussion, and again, thank you for your great participation in the discussion forum. We had almost full participation of every class member in there. The answers were really heartfelt and well explored. I think you guys really enjoyed the movie. Some of you had seen it before. Some of you had misgivings about seeing it again because you felt a certain way the first time you saw it. But it turns out everybody was really into it. I hope you're not doing that for my benefit, knowing that the movie is kind of part of my big top 5. I think part of the reasons that you should understand that is because one aspect of it is the fact that I'm nostalgic for it because I was a kid when I saw the film, and also growing into seeing it multiple times as an adult and viewing it over the years and getting different things out of it, and also in tandem seeing Steven Spielberg's career and how those things that he was really kind of beta testing in Jaws ended up working for him in his career. And I think by all your responses you kind of agreed with his way of storytelling and camera work. So like last week, I want to share with everybody some responses from the class. So I picked out a bunch here. First thing I want to get into actually is, I have something over here that I'm reading from. Before I get into the prompts, I want to add something at the beginning as kind of an intro, because a couple of people pointed out to me, and this particular student pointed out in their response, was how this film was mimicking modern times in a weirdly prescient way. So, and it even appears in memes, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. And you've probably seen this. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But it'll come up any second now, hopefully. Here we go. Yeah. So the mayor's response to the catastrophe and amity of the shark-eating bathers is eerily similar to a certain individual who doesn't dress particularly well, thinks politics is a game show, and doesn't really have good advice or decision-making capability. So yeah, that's wild, huh? So who saw that coming when Jaws was made back in 1975? Certainly not me. So here's somebody's response just bringing that up, which I think is great. I think it's very funny how close this film hits to our current situation with the outbreak of COVID-19. In the case of Jaws, a young girl named Chrissy is attacked by a shark, which results in her death. She is the first victim that warrants attention to the dangers lurking in the waters on the island. However, due to caring more about maintaining a clean reputation and healthy economy, those in authority opt to react to the case in denial and are slow to the inevitable drastic measures. People who live on the island are more concerned about the prosperity of their beachside businesses during the holiday as well as their leisurely escapades. One woman actually goes so far to say during a meeting that 24 hours is more like 3 weeks in response to temporary closings of the beaches. Throughout the movie, the response we get from people in this epidemic of sharks can be best described as indignant, anxious, and downright terrified. So I think we've all kind of seen that. Really strange the way that this movie has sort of mirrored that, but a catastrophe is a catastrophe, and human nature in their reactions is kind of oddly similar in similar circumstances. So that's pretty wild. So the first thing in the responses was the character reactions. So I have some of that. This kind of encompasses a little bit of camera reactions and camera work. In the beginning, when the boy gets eaten by the shark, this would be the Kitchener boy. There's a beautiful shot of Brody reacting to the blood that pools around the boy. The character of Brody seems a little jittery to begin with, but the different zooms on his face in the background further enhance the gravity of the situation. The worm's eye view of the bathers also creates an unsettling feeling, especially when you look through the eyes of the shark. It's the anticipation? That's not a word. Anticipation of an attack that creates fear in the movie. Without that slow underwater lens on the victims, we wouldn't have anticipation, and therefore we wouldn't have that thrilling sensation. I want to throw in a little note on this is that, that shark's eye view of the legs dangling and all that stuff, it's almost like, well, if I was a shark, that's just like a whole smorgasbord of food right there. But one of the things I left out of the prompts that I kind of regret in a little bit of a way is the fact that I didn't mention the soundtrack, John Williams' score of the classic dun dun dun, like the shark theme music essentially, which starts in the titles, and we actually have that shark's eye view and the music going on simultaneously. So right from the get-go, in terms of like narrative, we associate the music with the shark. And the interesting thing about that is that when Hooper is in the shark cage and he's got the spear and he's kind of ready to stick the shark with whatever paralytic fluid is in that spear, the shark appears behind him, bangs into the cage. There's no music leading up to that, and that's one of the big jump moments for that. One is the head like coming out of the hull of the boat, and John Gardner's head with his eye pulled out, but that one is even scarier in the sense that we have no anticipation, we have no idea where the shark is, and all of a sudden, bang, it hits the cage, and then the music starts. So without the soundtrack leading up to it, it pulls us away from the shark being involved in the scene at all. So good stuff there. Let's see what else we got. The next two people that I pulled from just in terms of their response to the camera work. So here's one student saying, one of the shots is a slow zoom scene in the beach scene with Brody as well as various shots of the ocean. Another one of Spielberg's iconic shots is an over-the-shoulder shot where he frames one camera, I think that should be one actor with their back to the rest so the audience can see all the facial expressions and can learn a little bit more about the character in the foreground. This is shown in the scene where Hooper and Brody are talking to the mayor, as well as when they are talking to the boat captain. And another one in that same response vein. Actually, this isn't really about camera work. This is kind of a general response just to the action and the pacing from actually another person's response, watching them observe it. So, hold on. I'm surprised how well this movie holds up after 45 years. I watched it with my girlfriend, who is a lot more emotive than I, and throughout the whole movie, especially during the final moments between the characters and the shark, she would gasp and scream during the scenes where the shark pops up out of nowhere, as I had just said. This movie is so well done, and every little thing from the camera shots to the shark scenes and the conflict between characters all adds to the intense tension throughout. One of the things about Spielberg's camera work, when I mention the word Spielbergian, I mean, I suppose that's like it's kind of made up in a way, but I suppose if you were in the industry and you said that, everyone would know what you're talking about. There's a bunch of them. The zoom that is on Brody when the Kitchener boy is being attacked, after the camera is interfered with trying to zoom in on Brody, and his vision is being interfered with by the people passing in front, and then we flip the camera and we see his vision, his point of view, and yes, it is being interfered with, but all the people walking by and playing and stuff. And when the boy is attacked on the raft, you see all that blood shoot up and everything. We see Brody's face, and there's this like, so it's a telephoto. So what's happening is that the character, the actor, Roy Scheider, is staying in place with the zoom is just being employed. Just the telephoto is just flattening out the perspective. So the face kind of changes perspective a little bit, but the background zooms in kind of by itself. So it's a little trick of the lens, but it adds so much to the reaction shot that Spielberg loves that it becomes totally iconic. A couple of the other ones is like the single camera format on the ferry, where the mayor and all of his cronies kind of take Brody out, into like a no man's land in the middle of the water on the ferry, basically cornering him and in a bunch of exposition telling him how he can't close the beaches and he's got to figure something else out. That's a really neat like one camera shot. And then another one that I love is that when the three main characters, Brody, Hooper, and Quint, are on the orca and they're chasing the shark, there's this great sort of like uplifting music in the score, and you really get that sense of adventure, and like Hooper actually smiles and says fast fish, and they're almost like elated by the quest, by the chase, and the camera kind of does this sort of swing across like the characters and the boat moving, and then you have the barrel zooming by and all that stuff. So that's also a very Spielbergian moment too, just in terms of action. You see stuff like that more in Raiders of the Lost Ark. You see a lot more of that kind of motion. And now in response to the Brody panic scene, if it actually does come up, which it's not. Just give me a moment here. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Who was it? Here it is. This person wrote a lot, which is great. So they say, this is actually one of my favorite shots in the movie, when the girl starts yelling that the shark is in the pond, and Brody says, "Now what?" in a very tired and frustrated voice. He doesn't seem like he's taking it seriously, having just overreacted to the kid's practical joke, with the cardboard pin. He seems to be assuming this is another distasteful joke until his wife reminds him that their son Michael is in the pond. The shot then pans to the left, starting slowly but steadily getting faster to match Brody's pace as he starts running through a thick crowd of people towards the pond. The shot is overwhelming and chaotic, and similar to the zoom on Brody in the get out of the water sequence. It really shows his mindset effectively without him needing to say anything or slow down the scene. The reason this scene sticks with me so much is because Brody is not reacting to the situation as a chief of police or a beachgoer or a citizen. He's reacting as a father, horrified that he has sent his son into danger, having previously asked him to take his boat to the pond thinking it would be safer. I think that moments like these, where Brody's fatherly instincts come out, are the moments where Roy Scheider's performance in this film is at its best. For some reason, the way he plays this character actually reminds me of my dad in a way that I can't really articulate. And for me personally, it makes these scenes of a father desperately trying to protect his children extremely effective. So I love that. I love looking at it from an analytical point of view and then bringing the personal into it and sort of showing the character of Brody through those different types of lenses, all in the one description of just like that one, what I was calling the Brody panic scene. Great. I can't even add anything to that. That's so nicely done. So let's get into the descriptions of characters themselves. Some of the responses have kind of conflated just the character descriptions with some of their arcs and some of the other stuff that I mentioned in the prompts, which is totally fine. I mean, you can bullet point everything when you respond to stuff, but you don't necessarily have to. You can make it more of a descriptive paragraph where you're kind of bouncing through those ideas as long as you encapsulate all of them. So let's see. So Chief Brody represents the ideal everyman, the head of the house, and rational straight man. His introductory scene tells us he's a family man who's very observant, as shown when he notes that the light is shining into the house differently than it used to, a minute detail that would be something that changes so little on a day-to-day basis that few people would actually recognize it. I like that little attention to detail there. It's a really minor moment in the movie, but it also shows that Brody has some experience as a cop. Though he has his flaws and hang-ups and can sometimes come across as paranoid, he is consistently the voice of reason in the movie, lacking any of the eccentricities of the other lead characters. When all three of them must band together, when all three of them must band together, he recognizes that he is entirely out of his element. Literally, he hates the water, and takes on a supporting role, following orders to the best of his ability as he tries to keep the community safe. I would argue that the one eccentricity that he has is actually mentioned here. It's like he's the chief of police on an island, yet he's afraid of the water. They say that in the movie. They make fun of him constantly in the movie about that. So I'm not the only one who picked up on that. Hooper. So they're talking about Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss wonderfully. First time we see Matt Hooper, he's coming off a boat into town, so we get the impression that he is an outsider. He looks like a scientist. He's very focused. He also seems a little bit clumsy. For example, when he tries to get the shark with the spear while in the cage, he drops the weapon. He has a lot of authority intellectually, but he doesn't seem to do his job well. He seems very decisive in the face of adversity, such as when he announces he's going to recommend the beaches stay closed, but he isn't actually great at handling the problems. It seems like Hooper only wants to kill the shark, but he's not equipped with the skills to do so himself. Hooper does have a different mindset than everybody else because he is the intellectual. I think somebody mentioned in one of their responses he's like the typical Cambridge intellectual, so that's kind of funny considering we're all in a Cambridge school. But I get it. We get it. Hooper has a completely different approach to this whole thing. And sorry, there's a plane. I live kind of close to the local airport. So the funny thing about him being clumsy, I like. So he does try and go after the shark with the spear. And that's that moment that I mentioned earlier that the shark hits the cage and he drops the spear. But also in that moment with Gardner's boat, he's diving on the boat with Brody topside. He picks that big shark tooth out of the hull where the shark had made a hole, and then Gardner's head pops out, and there's a scare moment, and he drops the tooth. So Hooper is dropping a lot of important objects in this movie. So I like the fact that this points out that he is actually clumsy. That tooth was kind of an important thing in terms of showing the mayor that he had proof that it was a great white that was that big. And when asked to produce the proof, he didn't have it because he dropped it. All right, and Quint. Talk about Quint. Quint is the next character to be introduced. This is continuing from their previous paragraph. And he has a very memorable entrance. He seizes the attention of the room full of clamoring people by dragging his nails down a chalkboard for longer than strictly necessary. He shows himself seated calmly in the back of the room where most people are pressing towards the front to stand and be seen. He's shown to be calm and collected and overall manly, with his house full of shark jaws, homemade liquor, comments about women, and his confidence in his ability to catch and kill the shark before he even knows much about it. He also shows he has confidence through his carefree attitude at the beginning of their journey by singing, rhyming, having fun with the quest. And of course, he has his very manly moments like chugging a beer in one gulp and crumpling the can afterwards, which Hooper attempts to imitate with a coffee cup, that styrofoam coffee cup. Good job, Hooper. That was a moment. That introduction of Quint with the nails on the chalkboard thing, and the speech that he delivers afterward is probably one of the best character introductions that you're ever going to see. It grabs your attention in the worst possible way, and then he launches into this soliloquy where you're just like, whoa, this guy is serious, and this guy's a serious character too. So good stuff. And then I want to jump into the last bit where we talk about the role changes of all the major players and how that moves throughout the film. It's a really nice response here. And for some reason the type is real tiny. So Brody goes from being the concerned father, loving husband, small-town sheriff, to being involved in a crazy shark wrangling operation. I guess that's what you could call it. It places him way outside his comfort zone, but he adapts pretty well. We see him taking on roles of action and quick thinking, being obviously uncomfortable with his situation, but he manages to come out on top. Classic hero. He's the everyman who just does what he thinks is right, but when he's faced with a big problem, he overcomes his insecurities and takes on an action role where he shows how capable he actually is. Hooper goes from looking like a spoiled rich kid with the big brain to being a very obviously talented and experienced sailor. He has a lot of knowledge from both scholastic education and from his hand-based encounters with the ocean and its many dangers. He does remain a bit of a smartass, however, but he seems to gain respect for his boatmates as the movie progresses, especially respect from Quint. You seem to think Quint was just a dumb, drunk, crusty old man with no proper knowledge of anything, but over time they come to respect each other. Hooper actually seems impressed after he tells his war story of the Indianapolis. I think it's funny how Hooper keeps his eye on Brody, telling him to hold on, Martin, and it's fine, Chief, like he's trying to reassure a child. Quint grows in the same way that Hooper does, but oppositely. Quint starts off looking like a bit of a kook, being gruff and vulgar, thinking highly of himself, with his immense amount of experience, but from the outside it looks like he has no education. As the movie progresses, he shows that his experience has provided him with extensive knowledge and is more than capable. He doesn't really soften at all. He remains a hard ass and keeps up his persona of a strong, manly man, always having to prove that he is the alpha. But he, too, changes his opinion slightly of Hooper initially, who he thought was a rich and smart boy but lacking experience, and decides later that he does have a fair bit of experience with someone so much younger than he. So, yeah, that change of Quint, particularly, that whole aspect of him trying to maintain his alpha dominance over the other two, with like threats and intimidation by, absurdly smashing the CB radio so that they can't get any rescue operation going, and the chief freaks out over that. And then Quint's basically completely futile attempt to run the shark aground in shallow water and drown him. That's not even the thing. And I think he knows that. And the boat isn't capable of outrunning the shark at this point anyway. It's been so badly damaged with all the salt water in the engine. So, yeah, good stuff. Good responses, and thank you again for that. So, moving on, put my notes aside here without destroying things. Okay, good. I'm fine. Totally fine. Let me show you what I'm going to do. So, I picked 15 comics that got turned into movies. I didn't go with like super mainstream stuff like Avengers and anything in the Marvel franchise or anything major in the DC franchise for that matter. I chose more independent things that were graphic novels and independent comics that got turned into movies that are not necessarily huge, big budget hits in some cases. Some are, and some are definitively not. So I wanted to give you 15 examples. And that way, you get to choose one. Okay, just one out of 15. And I'm hoping that somewhere along the line you had seen one of these things, whether it was a comic or the movie or both. If it's both, great. If it's one, good. If it's none, then you might want to delve into one of these things, with a little more complexity and attention. But I think it's a pretty good list. But let's go through and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So, yay, manly men. So this is obviously, if you don't know this, it's 300. Now, 300 was also a graphic novel. Come up in a second now, I promise. By Frank Miller. and in 2006 the film was made, and basically it's a sort of an historical tale of the Spartan king Leonidas and his 300 best warriors sort of faced off against like thousands of Persians led by Xerxes, and they kind of bottlenecked them in this little ravine thing and held them off for a super long amount of time, killing so many of them. Of course, they all die, but it rallies Greece during that time, the Spartan War, and blah blah blah. We don't want to get into a history lesson here, and this certainly doesn't deal with history very specifically. It's basically like this hyper masculine action films, which is just watching a comic book come to life. I mean, it's very much like Sin City, which I'll also talk about in that sense, except this has more CGI, different approach to the action and fighting, and a lot more color, and the color is used in almost the same way the color is used in the comic, where it's sort of like put in particular places for you to look. So like blood spurts and capes and costumes and landscapes, like just places, things. You'll notice that it's colorized in the same way a comic book would be. And by the way, the team that made the comic book is Frank Miller and Lynn Varley, who actually teamed up on Batman the Dark Knight comic as well, which was a seminal graphic novel. So that's one of them. So let's move on to next. Classic Guy Fawkes mask, V for Vendetta. I gotta give Hugo Weaving a ton of credit for spending the entirety of this movie under a mask and acting in the way that Hugo Weaving does, which is fantastic. So this is 2005. So the graphic novel was written by Alan Moore. Here we have some panels at the bottom here. Same guy who did The Watchmen, which I'll also talk about. So it's like a dystopian story that is based on the 88 comic, and it actually had enough of an influence on cultures, drawing from the legend of Guy Fawkes and Bastille Day, and in contemporary times it had influences on like Occupy Wall Street, Arab Spring. They were wearing that mask. It's amazing. So the Wachowskis, who did The Matrix, they did some of the writing on this, and I think they did a lot of justice to the comic book. Which the comic book, as you can see, there's a lot of dialogue. There's actually a lot of dialogue in the comic. There's a lot of exposition because it's very politically heavy. I think the film streamlines it. It does make some changes, fairly major in some respects, but I think the feel of the movie is actually quite minimalist in terms of the visuals, and I think for that reason the adaptation is different but good. And I want you to, if you're willing to choose this, that's kind of the thread of your exploration that you can go on there. So next we have, another Alan Moore picture, The Watchmen. So I'm going to talk about something that's very politically heavy. The Watchmen deals with a lot of political ideas, but it's in a sort of an alternative timeline where Nixon is in the third term and mass vigilantes, that is superheroes, are banned, and also there's an assassination of one of them, and they look into who is doing this, why is this happening, and the character of Rorschach is sort of operating outside the system, being sort of like the chaotic good guy in the whole thing. Or I don't know, would he be like neutral good? I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember how to do that stuff. It's been a long time since I played D&D. At any rate, it's a pretty tweaked kind of history story. Amazing visuals in the film. The comic is pretty stripped down. Still, excellent work in terms of the art, but it's very complex. It's very complex. It's full of this rich source material, the graphic novel, and the translation over into the film is difficult at times, but I think it's one of those things that holds up for its own particular reasons, and I don't want to give them away or foist my opinion on it too hard, but if you're going to explore this one, this is another good one. Oh boy. Okay, so we all had our emo phase. Okay, I didn't have an emo phase, but in 1994, that was a big deal. So this is The Crow, and the unfortunate, and he did an amazing job in this film. Brandon Lee, who unfortunately was taken way too soon in just a kind of a foolish accident. So it's 1994. Basically, it's a revenge hero kind of film that's kind of a combo of like if you smash together Batman and the Joker. But it's fascinating. It's very, very brooding, as you can tell, and very noir. It's super, so it's super dark, and it's basically just a ladder of people that he needs to kill in order to wreak his vengeance. But it's very well stylized in the way that the comic was, and it has a relationship with the comic that I think does it some homage. But again, if you haven't seen this is a good one to test yourself out on if you haven't seen this, because this is a kind of a seminal movie. It set a great tone, and it's a real sad thing that Brandon Lee didn't go on to do more stuff, because he was really great in this. Do we know what this is? Do you know what this is? I hope some of you do. If you're a fan of the art of Jamie Hewlett, then you would know Tank Girl. I want to split the screen on this like this. Let's see if that works. This image is maybe not compressed in the best way. So Tank Girl was 1995, and like I said, the comic was made by Jamie Hewlett, and I think Alan Martin was the writer on that. And it's kind of a crazy movie. It's kind of got a B movie sort of feel to it in the end, because it's pretty weird. They tried to push it like mainstream, but it really comes off almost like an indie thing, and it's like super mod steampunk, and who is it? Laurie Petty, who plays Tank Girl, has like 30 wardrobe changes throughout the whole film. It's like it's kind of amazing, but it just adds to the craziness of the film. And it's a strong female character who's totally kick-ass and just in a completely unique way. So maybe arguably the first good female superhero movie. So the manic craziness of Hewlett's art and the comic, and how it translates to the film, kind of gave the film its sort of unique qualities. And I won't say more than that, but that's definitely something that you can explore. Okay, here's something that's a little more not superhero-y by any stretch. I'll split this like this. I think this should come up properly. This is American Splendor. It was a movie made in 2003. The graphic novel was by Harvey Pekar, and Harvey Pekar. Here we go. So you can see there's a good casting in Paul Giamatti as the main character. It's basically a semi-autobiographical piece that is about a guy who is a character in a graphic novel who is not a superhero, who is just a file clerk in Cleveland, but the joys and struggles of his like super ordinary life are portrayed in comic fashion. And I think there's like this existentialism that kind of runs throughout it, and it's very exploratory psychologically in a comic that doesn't have action and supervillains and those kinds of things. So it's like a regular guy comic turned into a regular guy movie. So for somebody who wants sort of like the anti-superhero maybe not anti, but opposite like superhero fantasy angle, this is definitely the one. So yeah, I mentioned this earlier. Oh, I don't think that's actually the best way to do this. Let me do it this way. There we go. That's better. Sin City. So Bruce Willis cast pretty nicely as Hardigan, I gotta say. So 2005, another Frank Miller piece. I think that the graphic novels themselves, because he made a few of them, Frank Miller like took the noir thing and really just literally translated it onto the page, where it's just everything is just stark black and white. It's almost like every page is a series of woodcuts, just super high contrast, high action, high violence. I think Robert Rodriguez, who directed the first one, certainly. I know Tarantino had his hand in some of it, and Frank Miller himself did a fantastic translation of the comic onto the screen in trying to keep that stark black and white, that hard noir kind of feel to the whole thing. And it takes kind of like the extreme violence and action and kind of keeps it in the comic book mode. I think that maybe some people had a hard time getting involved in the character arcs because it was so comic-like in terms of its presentation, but I think that's an arguable point. That's one that you can certainly argue if you choose to explore this. And yeah, Hellboy. So Hellboy actually had two very excellent films, so 2004 and 2008. And on the right is the Mike Mignola, who was the creator of Hellboy for Image Comics and Independent. Had a very particular. Mike Mignola had a very particular look to it. It was very also noir. Speaking of noir, hard blacks and whites, but also very minimalist in his colorizing, but purposeful in doing so. Whereas the first film included, and maybe a little bit more so in the first film, was a little bit more in that vein, but still kind of Hollywoodized as far as like the full spectrum is concerned. However, the casting of Ron Perlman and his attitude as Hellboy is just so spot on. I can't even that. Couldn't have gotten any better than that. So that's one of the things that's really big in those pictures. And so, yeah, if you're more familiar, and this is generally the case, some people are more familiar with the Hellboy franchise as movies as opposed to the comic. But if you choose this one, I really want you to take a good look at some of the comic. Try and find some online. Don't have to read tons of stuff, but just take a look at it, get the feel for it, and then think about that in terms of the movies and like what worked, what didn't work. It's a good exploration. So this is one of the more well-known of all these things I'm presenting to you. So, do we know this one? Persepolis. Persepolis, out of all the ones I'm presenting to you, probably like the most on the nose in terms of the animation versus the graphic novel itself. So it's Marjane Satrapi, basically an autobiographical graphic novel. Tells a story of her as a young girl growing up under a fascist kind of society, but it's a great, touching kind of like generational story. And there's parts of it that seem like oppressive, but it's really broken up by not being super serious about itself, even though the underlying aspect of it is. And just this one scene, which the scenes basically mimic themselves, where she's stopped by a couple of the elders, the elder women, and pointing out that she's wearing a Michael Jackson patch, but it's actually a Malcolm X patch, and that's funny. But as far as like the kind of one-to-one translation of the art style to the screen, like it doesn't get any more pure than Persepolis. A wonderful story too, gotta say. All right, so I don't know where Chris Evans found the time to do Snowpiercer in 2013, because it was kind of like sandwiched between the Avengers and Captain America: Winter Soldier. I'm pretty sure. So, but good for him for doing it, because this really shows a side of him that's very different than the Cap character that we're very used to. Even though he's like the ostensible leader of this group in yet another dystopian world that is frozen, but society is actually trapped on a train, and it's a journey through the train, kind of like a side-scrolling video game, if you will, if you want to draw relationships between the two. But yeah, so this is a Bong Joon-ho directed film, or like a Korean director with a lower budget and a non-Hollywood studio with Hollywood level actors and Korean actors, and just this crazy blend of like this guy Bong Joon-ho, like he won the Oscar for Parasite recently. So this is his earlier film, and you can see this guy's like playing with like all different types of nuance and different styles that have like an Asian feel and an American feel and a European feel, all thrown into this thing, and it works amazingly well. I think it's a completely underrated film and an underrated comic. I think the comic is excellent too. It doesn't resonate in quite the same way that the movie does, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just different. There's a grittiness and as you can see in just from the still, like it's almost black and white in terms of its tonality that definitely mimics the comic as well. But again, that's for you to explore. Oh, this is such a great one. KickAss. Has anyone seen KickAss? I hope you saw KickAss. I didn't like KickAss 2 quite so much, but the first one, oh my god. What an incredible movie, and what a great adaptation of a kind of unsung graphic novel. So it was Mark Miller who did the original graphic novel, and it was Matthew Vaughn who directed the first Kick-Ass movie. I think in a comic form, having like a 10, 11-year-old girl killing people indiscriminately with a sword in really bloody fashion is a little bit easier to take than seeing Chloe Grace Moretz do it seemingly IRL on the screen. But man, her performance is absolutely stunning, and the inclusion of Nicolas Cage as her father in the film really lends it kind of, it's already slightly absurd to begin with, and then Nicolas Cage being like uber Nicolas Cage in the film takes it to a whole other level of zaniness I can't even tell you. So if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend it, but I also recommend the comic too, because it kind of shows you how they made the adaptations in terms of character development and story. Fun stuff. What do we got next? What's coming up? I don't know. I probably should know. Oh yeah. So, what's the name of this movie again? Is it Live, Die, Repeat? Is it Edge of Tomorrow? Who knows? They marketed it two different ways. And as a Tom Cruise vehicle that it's actually really, really good. And Emily Blunt is amazing in it. And the story is completely wild. And the mecha gear and the aliens, they're all so cool. And it didn't really take because I just didn't know how to market it properly, I guess. I don't really understand what happened there, but whatever. So, 2014, the film came out. There's an older manga, which I don't necessarily consider this a whitewashing, because nobody ever attempted to make this manga into a film, and the characters are not necessarily Asian per se in the manga. It's just a war movie, like a future war movie, a dystopian war movie. And the manga title is All You Need Is Kill. I think maybe it needed like a big budget house to try and deal with all the stuff that's in the manga, and they do it extremely well, I have to say. It's just such a great timeline. The action sequences are just amazing. Emily Blunt's as this hyper gifted fighter, her performance is tremendous. And Tom Cruise, I know you want to hate the guy, but sometimes he just gives good performances, and here he goes from like a complete bumbler to somebody who just has to do what he has to do, and is just learning along the way, and he does it great. Um, but I don't know what you want to call this film: Live, Die, Repeat, or Edge of Tomorrow. Uh, if you're looking for it, you kind of got to look up both, because sometimes it appears as both. But the manga title is All You Need Is Kill, and then you can see from the artwork, it's pretty spectacular as well. So we are talking about visuals here too, so we'd want to talk about how the visuals translate from film to from 2D to 3D too. Old Boy is an interesting one for me personally, because I was not aware of the graphic novel when I saw the movie. It came out in like 2003, so it was a while ago. So it's a kind of a neo-noir sort of thing, and as you can see, it definitely takes, the graphic novel definitely takes its cues from the noir genre. This particular still doesn't like exemplify that, although there are definitely moments in the film that do. This has a Tarantino like sensibility. It's Chan-wook Park that directed this. There's a great action sequence with Choi Min-sik, just kind of follows him through this like hallway in this a single shot, and it's absolutely astounding. It's worth seeing the film just for that. The character's name is Daisu. It's kind of got a very thrilling ending to it as well. This actually took the prize at Cannes. The film, but I picked up the graphic novel or the manga later to check out the art, and I was definitely thrilled by it because it is beautiful. It is so noir. It's a little less intense because it is a graphic novel that you can read at your own pace, whereas the movie's pacing is very different. It really draws you in and doesn't let go. But both super highly recommended. Okay, so we're in manga zone now, I guess, for these last three. Ghost in the Shell. Yeah, so another manga with some brilliant artwork. Let me just blow that up for you so you can see. I mean, great action in here and detail. Let's put the screen again. 1995, it came out. The manga was Masamune Shiro, kind of in the vein of Akira in terms of the quality of the animation. There's a little more CGI that's attached to this, but I think it's done extremely well. It's blended very nicely into the regular animation, and it's visually stunning. I think it in some ways it transcends the source material, but I think, again, if you're a connoisseur of anime and manga, you're probably hyper aware of this already. But if you're not, if you're aware of more than one than the other, then take a look at the other more carefully and study it and make a comparison. And last but certainly not least, those of you who took my illustration survey course know that I go on about Akira quite often. I love this minimalist shot of Kaneda and the bike. And here's a similar shot of Kaneda and Kaori. I can't remember her character's name. Sorry. On the same bike. So 1988. I mean, that's the thing about this. It's like one of the most incredible pieces of animation, and it was made in 1988. And the manga is super rich in its artwork, and it's fortunate that Katsuhiro Otomo, who wrote the manga, is also the director of the film. And so that richness for him, like, it had to translate over. So that's definitely there. There's kind of no arguing that. It's like 24 to 36 frames per second of animation, super smooth, amazing. One of the things that's interesting about it, though, that you should note is that the manga is, I don't know, it's like 4 or 6 volumes of material. It's quite extensive, whereas the film really kind of deals with one volume, and there are moments in it where you get glimpses of some of the other stuff that happens in the manga, but they're not explored fully. So there's a slightly disjointed feel to the film. I'll admit to you right now that first time I saw it, I thought that maybe my lack of understanding of exactly what happened in the film was because it was so non-Western, and I'm just like, oh, it's a lost in translation, and it's my fault. But it turns out that some of the stuff that was kind of thrown in there, thrown in the mix, inside stories and things like that, were part of a larger narrative that you really couldn't fit into the film. And Otomo actually went on to say that he was still working on the manga while working on the animated Akira, and he said the animated Akira sort of helped him ground himself in more of the ideas that he was trying to explore in the manga. So it's a very interesting back and forth between the two. So that's everything. So just to review, I'll close everything out here. Just to review, we have 15 films. So we've got 300, V for Vendetta, Watchmen, Crow, Tank Girl, American Splendor, Sin City, Hellboy, Persepolis, Snowpiercer, KickAss, Live, Die, Repeat, or Edge of Tomorrow, Oh Boy, Ghost in the Shell, and Akira. So that's 15 films, 15 comics and or graphic novels and or anime that you have to choose from here. I will list them all in the announcements so that you can choose. But look at one and talk about how they translated across from 2D to 3D. Story, visual, characters. And you're welcome to plug in like what you felt worked and what you felt did not work. That's what this is all about. Of course, I want you to explain why. I want you to get commensurate enough with the material so that you can take a good critical look at both and say, yeah, like the visuals here were extraordinary, but for at the detriment of the story, something like that. That could be applied to a few of these things, to be perfectly honest. But I'm going to let you deal with the content. So I hope all that makes sense. I hope that's a good range of choices. I didn't want to do anything too populist because it makes it more interesting for everybody. Okay. So I hope everyone's doing great. Appreciate you listening once again. Appreciate all the responses. Keep them coming. Love it. And we'll talk more next week. If you need anything, please feel free to email me. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.